NASA, the biggest black-budget black hole in existence, sucking in $52 million of American taxpayer money every single day, just spent $2.3 billion of your dollars to allegedly land a remote-control car on Mars for the 5th time. Yes, the multi-billion-dollar charade of landing on Mars has been happening since 1976, and thanks to the gullible, unquestioning masses enthralled and duped by these ridiculous Hollywood performances, they will most likely continue for decades to come. To begin with, the tiny reddish circular light in the sky known as Mars is not a spherical terra firma world millions of miles away capable of landing a rover on. All of the so-called planets were known to the ancients as wandering stars, because they differ from the fixed stars in their relative motions only. To them, stars were not spherical worlds millions of miles away, or suns trillions of miles away, as we are brainwashed to believe they are today. Stars were and are simply luminaries, immaterial lights in the sky, several thousand, not millions, of miles away, that revolve over and around the Earth. The Masonic magicians at NASA and the other world space agencies, using lying actor-nauts and Hollywood tricks like green screens, wires, harnesses, and endless amounts of CGI images, through pseudoscience books and programs, mass media and public education, universities and government propaganda, have systematically indoctrinated the entire world into believing what is nothing but an elaborate piece of science fiction. As you can clearly see for yourself with a bit of research, a telescope or high-zoom camera, and an open, discerning mind actually honestly admitting to yourself what is and what isn't a CGI, computer-generated image, it is obvious that the light in the sky known as Mars is not some science fiction desert planet millions of miles away. The CGI images NASA shows of a spherical world are clearly and admittedly not photographs, and look nothing like Mars when seen through a telescope. Meanwhile, the actual photographs NASA claims are coming from this completely other world look exactly like they are coming from Devon Island, Canada, with a red tint added in post-processing. There is nothing being shown in NASA's photographs of Mars that cannot easily be faked on Earth, and given the lack of skepticism or scrutiny from the gullible masses, they barely have to fake any evidence too. Just give them a computer screen of a CGI parachute with a CGI rover landing on a CGI Mars, and film a bunch of compartmentalized NASA 20-something employees straight out of space camp getting giddy and high-fiving each other, and that is literally all it takes. The unquestioning masses now thoroughly believe NASA has landed their 5th remote control car tens of millions of miles away and are receiving photographs from it through the internet. Yes, that's right. How do you think NASA sends and receives all data to and from this remote control car? They apparently have internet technology so strong and fast that they can operate a remote control vehicle from tens of millions of miles away. Do we, the public, have any independent evidence whatsoever that such technology actually exists? Of course not, and it isn't necessary. Again, because the science fiction indoctrinated masses are so bedazzled by their pseudoscientific priests at NASA that they don't require things like proof or evidence. When they are pressed on such matters, like the original moon landing tapes, LEM blueprints, telemetry data, and other physical proof, NASA says they filmed over the original moon landing tapes and conveniently lost all the physical evidence. As NASA actor-naut Don Pettit stated, "I would go back to the moon in a nanosecond, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again." So that is their excuse for why we haven't been back to the moon in 50 years, because they destroyed the technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again. But apparently they have had the tech since 1976, just a few years after the Apollo missions, to send Viking to Mars, which is allegedly over 100 times further away than the moon. Now let's talk about the supposed parachutes deployed by these rovers when landing. NASA says the surface pressure on Mars is only 0.3% of the surface pressure on Earth, and equivalent to the pressure at about 23 miles above Earth. This fact alone blows their hoax out of the water. Any skydiver knows there is not nearly enough air matter at that pressure to provide any kind of lift for opening and billowing out the parachutes NASA uses to land its Mars probes. No parachute ever devised has been able to successfully deploy at that altitude. They simply stream straight back, then never fill the rest of the way down. Joe Kittinger's record highest, fastest, and longest parachute dive from the Earth's upper atmosphere had him free-falling from only 19 miles high for 15 minutes at 767 miles per hour, and his drogue chute proved useless and offered no deceleration. Yet NASA would have us believe, for example, that their 2008 Phoenix's drone parachute managed to somehow slow it down from 12,738 miles per hour to 123 miles per hour in just 2.86 minutes before its final landing. In other words, NASA is claiming to do something on Mars that we have no evidence is even possible on Earth at significantly lower altitude and 16 times slower speed. NASA must have since gotten the memo because this time, for Perseverance, they claim instead that they fitted it with a special aeroshell and heat shield, which allows the, quote, drag of the Martian atmosphere to do all the heavy lifting for them, somehow slowing the craft from over 12,500 miles per hour to just 1,000 miles per hour before deploying the parachute. But again, even delving into these facts and figures is superfluous, because NASA simply shows us CGI pictures of a car on a parachute, and nobody questions it anyway. NASA.gov says that, quote, the Perseverance spacecraft departs Earth at a speed of about 24,600 miles per hour, about 39,600 kilometers per hour. The trip to Mars will take about 7 months and about 300 million miles, 480 million kilometers. The actual fastest vehicle that exists is the SR-71 Blackbird fighter jet, which can travel an incredible Mach 3.3 or 2,100 miles per hour. With no evidence whatsoever, NASA claims this ridiculous-looking CGI cupcake on a hot plate can achieve speeds 12 times faster than the fastest actual flying vehicle in the world. The endless red flags were no different with the Mars Phoenix rover landing in 2008. On June 3, 2008, MX News featured a picture given to them by NASA of the Phoenix's first dig into Martian soil, but on June 6, 2008, 3 days later, the London Daily Telegraph reported from NASA that, quote, another communications glitch stopped NASA's Phoenix lander again from making its first dig into the Martian soil. Unable to keep their stories straight, NASA gave out news blurbs before their time. Then, when Mars Phoenix lander's robotic arm photographed image 89666759, taken at 1439:37 LST, and image 89662868 at 1441:23 LST, only 2 minutes and 46 seconds later. In the first image, there is a fallen loose screw visible by the leg which disappears before the second photo is taken. NASA themselves claim the robot arm did not touch Martian soil until the next day, so they cannot claim to have moved it themselves, and the topical arrangement of sand and rocks remains exactly the same, so it cannot be explained by strong winds. So who picked up the screw? More than likely, an observant and well-meaning stagehand picked it up between shots. Back during the Mars Spirit rover, NASA messed up then as well, changing the Columbia commemorative plaque from the one featured just seconds before launch to a totally different one when supposedly on Mars. These are all smoking gun pieces of evidence that NASA is faking these supposed Mars landings. But again, without a critically thinking and informed populace, we will continue to be duped over and over by these media charades.
Scientists are working on exciting new projects involving space travel. NASA is sending a helicopter to Mars. The aircraft will travel to the red planet. Trinity Chavez explains.
The U.S. will be the first nation in history to fly the first heavier-than-air aircraft on another world. That's right, NASA is sending a small autonomous helicopter to the red planet. The small Mars copter will make a series of test flights to the red planet, which NASA says will enable more ambitious missions in the future. The full 30-day flight test campaign will include up to 5 flights of incrementally further flight distances, up to a few hundred meters each time, and longer durations as long as 90 seconds over a period. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine said in a statement, "The idea of a helicopter flying the skies of another planet is thrilling. The Mars helicopter holds much promise for our future science, discovery, and exploration missions to Mars." NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory began developing the 4-pound helicopter back in 2013. Only about the size of a softball, NASA officials said that the size of the copter was of utmost importance. Mimi Ong, Mars helicopter project manager at JPL, said in a statement, "To make it fly at that low atmospheric density, we had to scrutinize everything, make it as light as possible while being as strong and as powerful as it can possibly be." The 6-wheeled rover will be equipped with several cameras, a microphone, and a drill to collect samples. Its goal, to hunt for signs of habitable environments as well as sites that may have once hosted microbial life.
Alright everyone, welcome back to Cody's Lab. So as you can see, we're using the vacuum chamber once again, and I actually have a little feather right there, as you can see, suspended in front of a 12-volt electric fan. See, I got the batteries, a pressure gauge, and everything in there. To turn it on, I have a little tilt switch, says magnetically controlled. You can see when I turn the fan on, it blows the feather all over the place. This is, of course, at atmospheric pressure right now. So, I want to take this down to Martian conditions. You might have noticed the Martian reference over there. First thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of dry ice to the chamber, just so that the atmosphere gets replaced with CO2. Many of you guys were complaining about that last time. So now I should have a CO2 atmosphere, or at least it'll create one. And now we're going to suck out all of the air, or at least most of it, down to the point for about between 4 to 6 millimeters of mercury, which is, of course, the pressure on the surface of Mars. So let's plug in the vacuum pump. There we go. Give this a little while to suck down. These pieces of CO2 look really interesting in the vacuum. The gas produced causes them to levitate and float all over the place. But if you can see the gauge over there, you can see that the air pressure is just about to the point where it would be considered the surface of Mars. So since we're at Martian air pressure, let's unplug the vacuum pump and let's turn on this fan. Place your bets as to what's going to happen to this feather. Now the fan's only going to produce maybe 10 miles per hour worth of wind. On the surface of Mars, the fastest recorded wind speed is about 70 miles an hour. But let's say the superstorm in the Martian had wind speeds of 200 miles an hour, 20 times what we have here. To compensate for that, I imagine the feather is about 20 times easier to push over than a spaceship. So let's see what happens. Okay, fan's on. And the feather's not moving. In fact, let's zoom in on that. Not even flinching. Just turn the fan off. Okay, and let's turn it back on. So there you go. Now, extrapolating from that, you can imagine that even a 200-mile-an-hour wind on Mars isn't going to do much. Of course, Andy Weir had to figure some way to strand Watney on the surface of the planet, so I'll let him slide on that one. It happens as we come back to Earth. Yeah, almost immediately you can see the feathers start shaking around more and more violently. Okay, so the air stopped coming into the chamber, so now everything's due to the fan. What I think is interesting is the fan actually sounds different. It doesn't vibrate quite as much. I guess it is designed to run in an atmosphere. So there you go. The air density has a big impact on what wind velocity actually does.
What I think is interesting is the fan actually sounds different. It doesn't vibrate quite as much. So there you go. The air density has a big impact on what wind velocity actually does.
It's a very simple demonstration using a vacuum chamber and a drone, which highlights the absurdity of NASA supposedly flying a drone in Martian conditions millions of miles away, when our mate here can't even fly his drone in near vacuum conditions from a couple of feet away. So let's have a look. Look at his footage first, then look at the charade type of evidence that was submitted by NASA before they supposedly left on this incredible journey through heliocentric space. If you've got headphones on, warning here, turn your volume down a bit because our friend is going to be evacuating the air from the chamber, so we get near vacuum-like conditions. Just a heads up. So let's have a look how our friend's drone here operates in a vacuum.
Okay, drone in a vacuum chamber. 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm just gonna let it hover there. About negative 0.5 atmospheres. I'm having to throttle up more and more and more. Negative 0.8 atmospheres. Look, it's full throttle. It can't even get off the ground now.
Yeah, appreciate you doing the experiment. Even in a small chamber, a contained area, rather than the vastness of heliocentric space, still couldn't obtain flight. Now we're going to look at NASA's cunning little demonstration they did in a vacuum. They didn't have the honesty to show what our friend has shown here. They came up with a so-called successful demo where in fact they actually yanked their drone off the stand and held it there. The excuse was to replicate the gravity of Martian-like conditions. But you would have thought if they were being honest, perhaps they could have done 2 tests, one to successfully show that flight could be achieved in near vacuum or like conditions, and then 2 to simulate so-called Marses-like gravity. But no, we just got the dishonest version, yanking their drone off the stand and then holding it there, rather than display some honesty like our friend did here. So let's check out the NASA so-called successful test. And now we come to this NASA charade, touted as an incredible success, the big thumbs up for the adventure that was to come, which is now going to be gracing our screens very shortly. But as we've just seen, we can't have flight in a vacuum, even in a small contained area. So how is this Martian helicopter going to be flying with incredibly thin air? If they can't replicate it even in their own successful demo, they had to yank their helicopter off the stand. The excuse was replicating Martian style type gravity, which is less than here on Earth, okay, supposedly. Now I wouldn't have minded that if they proved footage of it flying in these conditions without it being yanked off the stand. That would have been scientific. You would have proved it, and then we could have seen it replicated with the tether, replicating the gravity. That way you would have done 2 incredible demonstrations that would back the claims. But as we've seen previously, the chap could even control his drone from a couple of feet away in vacuum-like conditions. But you're expecting us to believe you're controlling a drone on Martian conditions millions of miles away. But the reason you're saying it's possible is this successful demo here where you yank your prop off the stand, essentially cheating. And it gets pulled up. Come back again. And gets pulled up. Now I would have accepted it being on its lanyard, its tether, for a test to replicate the conditions of Mars and gravity. If it stood right next to a demo of this thing flying in a vacuum-like conditions, proving lift and flight. The NASA buffs, oh, it's got special blades. You couldn't even prove it in your vacuum chamber. You had to have a tether that came under the guise of replicating Martian-type gravity. An excuse. If this thing was so scientific, we'd have had two demos. One proving flight, and then the other replicating, proving flight and replicating the gravity. The reason NASA didn't show the other demo is because they're dishonest. Why? Because the results do not suit their narrative. As we saw, our friend in the first video couldn't even control or attain flight from a couple of feet away in his vacuum-like conditions. But we're expected to believe these clowns are flying helicopters millions of miles away in similar conditions? Have a word.
And so I remember being a kid watching on the nightly news the first pictures coming down from Mars, and they were coming down in these little strips like, you know, and it was like watching paint drip down the wall, and little bit at a time, and it took hours, you know, and you see, oh, there's the footpad, you know, and it was incredibly exciting. Of course, first time we got down onto Mars. Nowadays, we're used to digital cameras and our cell phones or DSLRs. We're used to big arrays of pixels, megapixel arrays. And so, you know, Mastcam Z is a 2 megapixel camera with 2 megapixel camera, which is pretty good for space. There are higher megapixel cameras on this rover, but for us, it does the job.
We're millions of miles away, though. Our selfie stick, if you will, is 150 million miles long.
150 million miles long.
So
God,
when we take the pictures, we can't just go out and do it. And when we press the shutter button, hey, take a picture. It takes a day for the signal to get to Mars. And it takes another day before we get the images back. So we have that challenge of time and space, if you will. So how do we do that then? We use our experience.
We use our experience.
We've been doing this for a long time. We've actually been imaging for 8 years with Curiosity, with the Mastcam, and that has led to a ton of experience. We use our intuition, and then we have computer tools. And as we put all these things together, we make a draft, we test it, we get results. Some of them work, some of them don't, and then we test again.
Oh my God, dude.